When Eilat Mazar realized she discovered an ancient structure near Jerusalem, she turned to the Bible to help explain what she found.
And she learned that this new discovery supports the biblical accounts of King David and his son Solomon.
Beneath Jerusalem's crumbling hills, a silence 3,000 years old has finally broken. For centuries, whispers told of King Solomon's lost tomb, a vault of gold, wisdom, and secrets too powerful to share.
Breaking news, as a matter of fact, out of the city of David, ancient Jerusalem, one of my favorite places in all of Israel. Yet another amazing archaeological discovery at the city of David.
Scholars dismissed it as legend, but a storm, a hidden tunnel, and a sealed chamber have changed everything. What was uncovered left experts stunned and believers shaken. In this video, we'll uncover the treasures, inscriptions, and mysteries inside Solomon's tomb, and why the greatest secret may still be waiting in the dark, the legend that refused to die. For centuries, the name Solomon has carried with it an aura of awe, mystery, and even fear. He was no ordinary king. The Bible portrays him as a man of staggering wisdom, wealth that bent the imagination, and a kingdom that shone like a beacon in the ancient world. His reign in the 10th century BC marked what many consider the golden age of Israel. And yet, amid the grandeur of his temples, palaces, and vast trade empire, one question has haunted historians, explorers, and the devout alike. Where did this legendary king take his final rest? The answer has been whispered across time in riddles, myths, and desperate searches that nearly always ended in disappointment. The scriptures themselves leave tantalizing clues, but no clear directions. Solomon is remembered for building the first temple, a masterpiece of cedar beams from Lebanon, walls plated in gold, and stones so finely cut that they seem to lock into place without mortar. If his temple could shine like a jewel above Jerusalem, surely his tomb would be no less extraordinary. Yet the texts are strangely silent about his burial. No sarcophagus has ever been unearthed, no monument marked with his name, no chamber unveiled with certainty. For a king whose shadow stretches across Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, his grave has remained elusive, as though deliberately erased from the landscape of time. Centuries on end saw a variety of theories flourish. Some were certain that the tomb lay directly under the Temple Mount, closed by Solomon himself, and around which divine wrath roamed. Others contended he was interred in secret caves beneath the Judean hills, or along secret tunnels whose entrances were known only to the ancient priests. Medieval knights were gutting beneath Jerusalem with the conviction of exposing a vault of sacred treasures. The 19th century explorers dashed into the rocky slopes around the city of David, following half-understood documents and local legends. Again and again, they departed with nothing but shattered stones and a heart full of despair. William F. Albright proposed that Solomon's resting place had passed from mere archaeology into legend. Some tales told of a tomb so laden with gold that its glare could rend the vision of any aspiring thief who chanced to catch sight of it, as if shielded by death traps and evil curses designed to collapse the tunnels on any intruders. Some even pinched the tomb for not merely being a resting place, but also a repository for ancient wisdom in the form of scrolls and tablets that harbored the secrets of geometry and medicine, and perhaps even witchcraft. Here, history's very muteness stirred hotter tongues. If Solomon's temple could disappear without a trace after the Babylonian conquest, so would the grave have gone beneath the steady onslaught of time. By the dawn of the 20th century, most of the learned world dismissed the search as romantic folly. To them, Solomon was half historical famous, half mythical, with an account of a kingdom embellished in scripture, while his grave remained something poetic. The discipline of archaeology turned to other ruins, other kings, and other mysteries that seemed more reachable. Yet the tale would not die. Underneath the skepticism, the pull of the story remained. Even today, throngs whispering prayers at the Western Wall in Jerusalem, convinced that somewhere below their feet lie beside the body of the wisest. The addition of new evidence, making it possible to prove that Solomon had not been merely a character in the biblical narration, but a real person, historical king, has only deepened the mystery. The excavations referred to have unearthed evidence of copper mines in Timnah, believed to have been part of the wealth accumulation of his kingdom. Artifacts putting trade routes linking Africa, India, and Arabia into the same pattern as the accounts in the Bible about Solomon's fleets had been discovered. All the new discoveries only added to such a tantalizing question. If such stories are true, then surely his tomb must exist also. But a sudden rainstorm on a Jerusalem hillside cracked the legend wide open. The tunnel that shouldn't exist. The hillside in Silwan looked ordinary at first glance. Rugged limestone, scattered shrubs, and the kind of uneven terrain that hides more than it reveals. But beneath its weathered face, radar scans told another story. Dr. Emily Carter's team, equipped with ground-penetrating technology, swept the slope and froze at what appeared on their monitors. Instead of random cracks and voids, the earth revealed straight lines and sharp corners. This wasn't the language of nature, it was design. A tunnel system, intricate and deliberate, was hidden beneath their boots. At first, the team suspected it might be part of Jerusalem's sprawling network of ancient cisterns or aqueducts. After all, the city is riddled with underground channels carved by both kings and conquerors. But this was different. The tunnels ran too deep, too purposeful, and with odd features that set them apart. Some passages led nowhere, abruptly ending in blank stone walls. Others curved back on themselves, looping like a maze. These weren't mistakes, they were decoys. Whoever built this structure didn't want it found easily. Back and forth, ever deeper with exploration, it seemed the final conclusion was getting stranger. Shadows like hidden chambers below the surface, with tunnels crisscrossing like veins between. Even more disquieting were signs of possible traps. Some sections looked deliberately very unstable, like they were designed to collapse at the slightest disturbance. For Dr. Carter and her team, it was a chilling message. It was not an abode, but a candle holder against time and intrusion. An ancient world really went to great lengths to ensure that whatever secrets lay buried here would remain undisturbed. And then came the markings. Just outside the first hollow in the hillside, faint carvings were spotted beneath the runoff mud. Hebrew symbols, weathered yet still visible, were scratched into the rock with meticulous care. Cleaning revealed a repetitive pattern of 7 lines and 7 symbols, a number tied directly to the first temple's construction, which itself took 7 years. To Carter, nothing about it seemed coincidental. They looked less like graffiti and more like instructions coded to do things and confuse outsiders. These were all serious disadvantages of continuing this route. The limestone below Silwan is very fragile and collapses readily when disturbed. And most importantly, this area is a politically sensitive hotspot. Adverse excavation could lead to crises and the possibility also cave-ins. Each step was thus very slow and painstaking, while carrying with it the weight of history and diplomacy. Increased security was soon put into effect upon the hearing from a number of employees on all sites, imparting the information that a discovery had been made. There was fear that looters or extremists might invade the site. The site is not only susceptible to falling rock, human greed is another thing. On the intellectual level, the promise of the coming days of discoveries and exploration that the great tomb held in store for them, far outweighed the imminent danger. The tunnels were fantastic. Their design, constrained by the most careful craftsmanship, must have manifested a sense of foreknowledge and intelligence hardly comprehensible for their own times in the minds of the builders. Carter liked referring to it as ancient engineering with modern paranoia. Every diversion from the path, every dead end, seemed to carry the consciousness of someone who planned for intruders thousands of years before. It was, after all, as if King Solomon himself were overseeing the laying of his solace, architecting it in such a way that it would never be touched until the time appointed. And just beyond a stone slab sealed for millennia, the earth seemed ready to exhale its secret, breaking the ancient seal. For weeks, the team stared at the slab like it was a riddle carved in stone. To most eyes, it was just rock, jagged and immovable. But to Dr. Emily Carter, it was a barrier meant to keep intruders out and secrets in. Getting through it wasn't about brute force. It was about understanding the mind of its builders. They weren't just masons, they were guardians who had prepared for this very moment 3,000 years earlier. The stone itself wasn't smooth or decorative, but it was fitted so tightly into the tunnel that there were no gaps, no seams to pry at. Surrounding it were grooves and faint markings, some weathered almost beyond recognition. But under angled light and high-resolution scanners, the details began to emerge. To be more accurate, it was not just a door, but also the more vital part of a defense system. But radar scans had revealed false passages and trap-like tunnels rigged to collapse. Carter feared that one wrong move would probably take the entire hillside crashing down on them. The work began with surgical precision. Laser scanners and 3D models were used to map every indentation, every crack, every suspicious hollow by her engineers. It was like defusing a bomb where the wire was composed of stone and time. Day after day, the team worked in silence, endlessly breathing. They turned levers, tapped gently on weak points, and rang the disputes of ancient inscriptions, which might have stood for instructions. Carter herself spent long nights studying a fragment of Hebrew text found a short distance from the site, checking it against biblical descriptions of temple construction. Some spoke about gates that yield only to wisdom, and stones aligned with the stars. For her, it read almost like a poetic blueprint, lying dormant for millennia, awaiting discovery. Then it roared. A low, resounding groan echoed through the chamber as the slab shifted slightly under pressure. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and the ground rumbled beneath their feet. For a spine-tingling moment, the team froze, terrified that the collapse they had dreaded would now come. The tremor died down and was only silence, with the knowledge that the seal had moved for the first time in centuries. The air bore a mixture of excitement and dread. It was closer, but the danger was indeed real. On the third day of their efforts, they finally achieved success. After a last adjustment of weighted pulleys, the stone slab cracked open just enough to allow a rush of cold, stale air to escape. It was not just a breeze, it was the exhale of centuries' air that had not touched the outside world since the time of Solomon. It was not a soft sound. It bellowed like something very old, having finally let go. And in that moment, the team felt everything as if the mountain had spoken itself. Beyond this slab was only void, dark. The flashlights held above them cut through the nothingness, but when they saw what lay in front of them, they fell silent at once. A chamber stretched ahead, bigger than they had initially anticipated, and its walls glimmered slightly under the dust. First beam of light struck gold, not a speck or chunk, but entire vessels, stacked and lined along the walls. Golden bowls carved with Hebrew inscriptions caught the glow. A slender menorah stood tall, its branches heavy but standing, exactly like one finds in the Book of Kings. It smelled strongly of spices, thyme, frankincense, saffron, and so vividly that one could think time had stopped. Jars cracked to let out perfume, and oils that had been made centuries ago when rituals familiar to no one were performed. In one of its corners, silks and fabrics, colors dulled but still there, gave an echo of trading ways that stretched as far as India and Africa. Lions and palm trees carved from ivory have been covered under thick dust layers, but glimmered nonetheless. It was no myth, it was real. The tomb had ceased to be a legend. Yet the glitter of treasure was nothing compared to the strange symbols carved into the walls, the forbidden knowledge in stone. The treasures dazzled everyone, but it wasn't the gold that held the team in place. It was the silence, and then the carvings. Torchlight swept across the chamber's walls, revealing shapes that were neither random nor ornamental. Lines cut deep into limestone twisted into spirals, triangles, and ratios that looked less like decoration and more like blueprints. These weren't merely inscriptions of faith or art, they were instructions. The chamber didn't feel like a tomb anymore. It felt like a library written in stone. At the center of the northern wall, one symbol dominated: a star, sharp, deliberate, and etched with precision. It bore uncanny resemblance to what later generations would call the Star of David. But this wasn't a national emblem carved on a flag centuries later. This was ancient, raw, and connected directly to Solomon's reign. To legends, it was more than a symbol. It was the seal of Solomon, a mark said to carry mystical power, capable of commanding spirits and sealing away knowledge too dangerous for ordinary men. To find it here, in the depths of a hidden chamber, was enough to make even the most skeptical archaeologists hesitate. And the walls bore much more. Intertwined with the star were lines of geometric patterns, angles so precise they practically resembled higher mathematics. Ratios of circles to squares, spirals mapped almost perfectly, and alignments that suggested astronomical calculations. One scholar muttered that this looked like Solomon's calculus notebook, half joking but half serious. These carvings hinted at an understanding so far ahead of its time, as though the builders encoded knowledge about architecture, astronomy, not perhaps even sacred geometry itself, into the stone itself. In a far corner of the room, the team found clays stacked in piles. Some were cracked and eroded, while others were remarkably intact. The writing on it was tight, dense, and deeply inscribed in Hebrew. The first clay tablet detailed the dimensions of the temple. It almost perfectly aligned with the Book of Kings. Just this one was amazing, actual physical proof of texts held through thousands of years. But the second tablet shook everyone to the core. It was not as orderly as the first. The script unraveled into riddles, phrases that bent grammar and defied any sort of easy translation. Keys, hidden wisdom, the voice within the stone. It sounded more like a cipher than something you would think of as an actual record. One phrase really stood out: "The light of knowledge is locked until the star is turned." The archaeologists cast nervous glances at one another. What exactly was it? A metaphor, a poetic flourish, or instruction? The phrasing rang with echoes of texts linked to the so-called Key of Solomon, often considered a pseudo-medieval compilation of magical writings. Yet, all of a sudden, in a hall sealed for the last 3,000 years, came the danger that such legends might have roots much older than anyone dared believe. Then followed the discovery that silenced the space. Set into the southern wall, almost hidden under deep layers of detritus, lay a chest. It was small, no bigger than a lowly piece of modern luggage, yet it fought with the space it occupied. No one moved to open it. The atmosphere was somehow against it. Carter recorded in her notebook that even standing next to it was the feeling of trespassing in someone else's memory. The team cataloged the chest, photographed it from all angles, and discussed its fate. To try to force it open would probably lead to its destruction. To leave it alone would be to resist the very temptation that had drawn them here. And then came the words that ignited a worldwide academic firestorm. When Solomon spoke from the walls, the chest remained sealed, heavy with questions. But something else soon pulled the team's attention away. Along the eastern wall of the chamber, half hidden behind layers of dust and soot, faint scratches caught the light. At first, they seemed like erosion, nothing more than the scars of time. But when carefully brushed and illuminated, they revealed something extraordinary. Hebrew letters, clean and deliberate, carved into the stone. Unlike the geometric patterns, these weren't codes or symbols. They were words, and as the sentences took shape, a hush fell over the room. The inscription read, "May wisdom guide my hand as stars guide sailors." Simple, poetic, yet haunting. The style matched ancient Hebrew, and its tone echoed the voice of Proverbs, wisdom literature traditionally attributed to Solomon himself. For Carter and her team, it was as though the walls had opened to let the king speak across the gulf of 3,000 years. It wasn't a relic or a vessel, it was a message. The chaos in the team's tent at base camp had erupted. Images of the inscription slid down the secure channels and came to rest on the desks of scholars far and wide. By that evening, professors were dissecting the text in late-night calls, live-streamed debates, and heated emails. Some called it the smoking gun, the first immediate personal trace of Solomon ever to emerge, while others scoffed, saying the phrasing was too polished, too poetic. It seemed rather to be intended for lending credence to belief than for recording history. Skeptics say it could have been carved by a scribe to glorify Israel's most famous king centuries later. But the story doesn't end here. Just below the major inscription, faint outlines of other symbols appeared, somewhat less Hebrew and anything but abstract. Some saw hints of Persian influence, thus possibly indicating later additions. The uncertainty served to stoke more outrage. Was this really Solomon, or was it later effrontery to mimic him? Yet, the words meant something. It felt personal, almost contemplative. The voice of a ruler looking out into the stars for guidance while under the crushing weight of power. News media weren't long to respond to the situation, screaming headlines of every description. Solomon's last words found. Biblical hoax in Jerusalem. Witnesses' reactions covered all the shades of respect, awe, and caution. Rabbis went through the scrolls, examining the phrases against the judges of known scripture. Christian theologians therein confirmed the existence of a king who, according to the Bible, existed. By Quranic tradition, Muslims, who regard Suleiman as a prophet, weighed the argument. The social media feed exploded with opinions, speculations, theories, and heated arguments. Some deemed it as proof of the historicity of the stories found in the Bible. Others have called it a dangerous manipulation. Comparatively speaking, Dr. Carter's position was that of an island in a storm, calm yet conciliatory. The academic, her very standing resembling the most fragile color of light, added, "We weren't looking for a king, but the clues kept pointing toward him. And when history speaks, even in whispers, we owe it to the world to listen." For every weight of her warning, all scholars and archaeologists knew that no one inscription, however potent, could hush the case. It might excite the argument, but could never settle it. But the real shock came when another name appeared inside the tomb, the Queen of Sheba's shadow. When the dust settled on the eastern wall, what emerged wasn't just another inscription. It was a name, one that thundered across history and scripture. Sheba. The letters were chiseled with the same deliberate hand as the Solomon inscription, but the message they carried felt even heavier. This wasn't a random carving. It was a record of a royal visit around 950 BCE, the very story described in the Book of Kings and echoed in the Quran. Solomon and Sheba, two figures separated by continents yet united in legend, were suddenly bound together in stone. The moment the team translated her name, the air shifted. Carter recalled it as time-stopping in real life. For centuries, Sheba's story has fascinated believers and skeptics alike. The Queen of Sheba, ruler of a wealthy kingdom in either modern-day Ethiopia or Yemen, is said to have traveled with caravans loaded with spices, jewels, and riddles to test Solomon's wisdom. In the biblical account, she left Jerusalem awestruck, declaring that not even half of Solomon's greatness had been told to her. To Muslims, she was Bilqis, a monarch who conversed with Prophet Suleiman and witnessed his divine wisdom firsthand. To many, she was a figure who blurred the line between history and myth. And here she was now in stone, not in scripture, not in oral tradition, but in a hidden chamber beneath Jerusalem. The carving not only had her name, it also recounted a royal exchange: ivory, frankincense, gold. An encounter that solidified the seal of alliance, not just admiration. Hints of common knowledge, trade, and diplomacy bridges across kingdoms. This raised all kinds of explosions for historians. It suggested that, if authentic, then, contrary to folklore, the visit was actually an event that altered the political and economic geography of the ancient Near East. However, the discovery, notwithstanding its glorious causation, again turned the sides of opinions. Almost instantaneously, religious authorities, from Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, jumped onto the carving and declared it proof. The priests found evidence of scripture incarnate. The Imam cited Surah 27 of the Quran, which mentions Sheba coming to Suleiman, and drew parallels with this recently uncovered text. The rabbis noted this document as evidence of Israel's ancient magnificence. With so many exaltations and praises, the experts started to fight back. A few said that those characters did not exactly look 10th century BCE. Some suggested that it may have been a later addition to prop up the legend. Others whispered that the timing was just too nice, too neat for the find. As these arguments developed, politics erupted. So hot was Jerusalem, already one of the most contested pieces of land on earth, that it became even worse. Governments were discussing the ownership claim over the site. The religious factions were fighting amongst themselves as to who really rightfully interpreted the find. Suddenly, Carter's excavation became more than archaeology, but a lightning rod for faith, history, and national identity. There were hints flying that officials were quietly moving to insulate access, fearing that the inscription could rekindle fresh strife. Nevertheless, there was something deeper that stirred beneath all that noise. For the archaeologists standing in that chamber, the carving did not simply confirm the existence of Sheba. It implied that the meeting with Solomon bore consequences that extended much further than the texts are willing to tell. Alliances meant common trade routes that surely stretched into Africa and Arabia. Symbols indicate that knowledge could have been shared, maybe even technological or architectural concepts. What if Solomon's wisdom was not purely divine insight, but rather an amalgamation of ideas harvested from several kingdoms? What if Sheba left hints behind, perhaps even fragments of her own culture interwoven into Israel's very matrix? Such questions grew loud in the ears of the team as they continued probing the wall. An alcove appeared right behind the Sheba inscription, sealed off with stone slabs that were thinner than the main door, yet definitely deliberate. Carter referred to this as a chamber within a chamber, like a whisper behind the story. When it broke open, there were no more inscriptions, no treasure, but a small gold object obscured in dust. A ring, thick, heavy, and incomparably royal. The star was embossed on its face, crude but almost freakishly similar to that engraved on the wall of the chamber. And just when the debate hit its peak, a golden seal emerged from the dust. The missing king. The golden ring shimmered under the archaeologists' trembling flashlights. Its surface was rough, hand-carved, yet the symbol engraved on it was unmistakable, a six-pointed star. To modern eyes, it looked like the Star of David. But this version was ancient, raw, and heavy with meaning. Lab tests would later confirm that the gold's metallurgy aligned perfectly with the 10th century BCE, the very time of Solomon. For Carter and her team, this wasn't just jewelry. It was identity, a seal that might have stamped decrees, marked treaties, and authenticated the rule of Israel's most legendary king. The possibility that this was Solomon's personal ring electrified the world. Legends long claimed that the king wielded a ring of power, sometimes described as granting him dominion over spirits, sometimes simply as his royal seal. Holding the artifact in their gloved hands, the team debated whether they were staring at history's most famous signet. Some cautioned that similar rings had been found from later kings, like Hezekiah, suggesting the design might have been shared across dynasties. Others insisted that its crude yet deliberate carving marked it as older, the original, not the imitation. Carter leaned closer, tracing the lines with her eyes. "These aren't prayers," she whispered. "They're notes." The chamber suddenly felt alive, as if the walls were singing in silence. The markings referenced instruments long tied to biblical worship: harps, lyres, flutes. One symbol closely matched descriptions of the 10-stringed harp associated with David, Solomon's father. According to the Book of Chronicles, Solomon inherited not only the throne, but also a court of music, a symphony of worship meant to echo through the temple. Now, carved into these stones, was the possibility that those melodies had been preserved. An intern, unable to resist, plucked the notes on a replica harp. The sound was crude, hesitant, yet haunting. The tones hung in the air like a ghostly echo of the past, chilling everyone who heard it. The chamber wasn't just a tomb or a treasury anymore. It was a time capsule of worship, politics, and culture, a living archive of Solomon's world. But even with music resonating off the walls, one truth grew heavier. The body of Solomon was still missing. AI scans of the bedrock hinted at hollow spaces beyond the chamber, geometric lines that could signal more rooms or nothing at all. But digging further would require permits, diplomacy, and the kind of international cooperation rarely seen in Jerusalem. For now, the tomb's deepest secrets remain sealed. The discovery left the world torn between awe and frustration. They had touched Solomon's world, perhaps even his personal belongings, yet the man himself remained elusive. The artifacts whispered of power, wealth, wisdom, and music, but his resting place was still shrouded in silence. The tomb's artifacts and inscriptions may confirm Solomon's reign, but the absence of his body keeps the mystery alive. What do you think? Is this really Solomon's tomb, or just the greatest archaeological illusion of all time? Comment your thoughts below, like, subscribe, and watch our next video for more ancient mysteries waiting to be uncovered.